In this video, I'm going to be talking about introverted intuitives or empaths. Now, a lot of INFJs are empaths, and before I get into deep into this topic, you're welcome to watch this video. Carl Jung himself speaks about this. He also speaks about extroverted intuitives, extroverted empaths. Now, before I really dissect this myself, I want you to take a look at the post that I've made. You're welcome to follow me on Facebook, on Instagram. I do not have Twitter, though I'm going to be creating an account today. So I will put the link in the description. You're welcome to follow me as well. I'm going to read this, and I want you to pay close attention. It's a little bit philosophical, but more than anything, it's a little bit stoic. It says, never assume an empathetic person is an empath. There is a complete difference between an empathetic person and a person who is an empath or intuitive. Introverted intuitives are empaths on a completely different level and means than an extrovert, and I'll be dissecting and explaining that in this video. And first, let's cover what is an empath. An empath is an intuitive individual who dissects reality by means of their subconscious. So let me stop there and explain. An empath is somebody who, through their intuition, dissects their perception of the world around them, whether it be people, plants, clothing, colors, or even another person's desires. An empath isn't someone who simply watches and observes. They are somebody who experiences reality around them by dissecting it through the means of their subconscious. And then they experience the neurological signals and perceptions given them by their intuition. So when I hear that your birthday is coming up, we'll throw a number out there, March 27th. Your birthday is coming up. Then I, as an empath, am then, intuitively dissecting that reality. Your birthday is coming up. I am now going through my subconscious to experience in an emotional value the perception given me by realizing that the day that you were born holds meaning. That is what distinguishes an empath from an empathetic person. Anybody can have empathy and sympathy on another person. An empath, however, is an instrument of emotion. That is the difference between the two. Now, I'm going to take this a step further. Let's talk about an empathetic person and what distinguishes them from a non-empathetic person, because as Carl Jung speaks, there are different levels of empathy and there are different types of empaths. First, let's talk about an empathetic person. An empathetic person is somebody who feels of compassion on or towards a specific situation, individual, or thing. If a flower had its petal ripped off, an empathetic person might feel for that flower. However, this is much more common in introverts. This is not to say extroverts cannot be empathetic individuals. It is simply to say that introverts are more likely to have empathy towards non-living people or animals, such as flowers, trees, the grass, and even water itself. Now, this is what specifically and precisely divides an empathetic person from an empath. We'll use introverts for the sake of conversation. An introvert tends to see plants or non-living things equally the way that they would see another human being. This naturally means that most introverts, in one way or another, tend to be empathetic towards people and situations that life throws at people, whether that be your garden dying, whether that be your house catching fire, or even you losing your job. Now, someone who's not an empathetic individual may still feel for the person who goes through these things and say things along the lines of, "That's rough, I'm sorry that happened to you," or, "Man, that really sucks." However, an empathetic person doesn't think along the same lines. In fact, they feel along those same lines, and that guides their thinking. This is not what an empath does. This is what an empathetic person will do. An empathetic person will put themselves in the shoes of the other individual and feel for that person. Empaths do the same thing, but on a much different scale. An empathetic person will say, man, I had a garden once, and whenever I wasn't able to take care of it, I felt really bad. I can kind of feel for you. I've lost a loved one too, so I can understand what it's like to be grieving right now. That is what an empathetic person will do. However, an empath is different. An empath will see and hear and imagine and dissect the reality that your garden was burned down. And now they will intuitively feel for the garden that is, and I'm talking introverted intuitives, introverted empaths. They will feel for that garden that got burned down, that got destroyed. And as a direct result, they are now coming back to reality with a completely different perspective and a completely different emotional ground than the person who is. Give me just one moment. I want to clear out my gallery, make sure I have enough room for this video. Okay, I'm back. It's a good thing I did that. I was almost out of space. There it is again, intuition letting me know. Oh, I've been recording for 6 minutes. Anyways, so what the introverted intuitive will do, the empath, is they will realize that the flower bed has been burned down. And they will feel for both the colors of the flowers that were burned and turned to gray, bright pink, yellow, and red, or all went up in flames. And now the introverted intuitive or empath is feeling for those flowers. And now they take that feeling and they relate it back to you, realizing that you said that you were upset that your flowers got burned down. They are now feeling what you felt. And whenever you say, no, that's not what I meant. Whenever I said I'm sad that I can't take care of the flowers anymore. So now they will go back to their subconscious, taking their existing feelings and or rewriting them. They will go back to the flower bed and they will say, I want to take care of the flowers. But look, the flowers are dying because I don't have the time and I have to watch those flowers die by my hands. And now the empath is, or the introverted intuitive, is coming back to reality after dissecting reality, given a new perception by their intuition. They are now feeling what you feel. They are thinking what you think. They are understanding what you are trying to say. Empaths are not just emotional people. They are instruments of emotion. Now, what about extroverted intuitives? It is important to note the difference between extroverts and introverts are quite keen on their perception of reality and the world around them. An extrovert an introvert will think and reflect before they approach the outside world. They will go from the inside out. The reverse is true for an extrovert. The circumstances and world around them directly influences how they feel in regards to a particular situation and or how they will experience life. So this is not a concrete golden rule. There are different levels of extroversion and introversion, and no one person is 100% introverted or extroverted. However, it's important to note between these keen distinctions that an introverted intuitive will also feel differently than an extroverted intuitive. So, give me just one moment. Turning off my fan. It was drying out my eyes. So much as in the same way an introverted intuitive will go inside of their head to... Apologies about the constant pauses. My toe had been stubbed on the floor and my nail was bent. It really hurt. So, to reiterate what I was saying, an introverted intuitive will go inside of their head and inside of themselves before reflecting outwardly. However, an extroverted intuitive will do the same thing but differently. They will hear what you are saying and they will connect with you in an extroverted manner in a way that will allow them to introvertedly feel as an empath in the same way an introverted intuitive would. However, the difference between the two is that the feelings in realization of what they are feeling in that moment may not come to them right away. Instead, they may be driven by their emotions to connect with you in a way that makes you feel valued, where they may not be able to have the perception of what you're feeling immediately. It isn't to say that they are not being directly affected by their external stimuli and what is happening around them. If you were to say, my flower bed burned down and I'm sad because I can't take care of it anymore, they will in turn feel for you and not like an empathetic person. They will feel for you as an empath. Because you're sad, I'm deeply sorry. Because you're sad, they also... I'm so sorry. I lost my train of thought. I'm going to call my boss and make sure that never happens again. That is so disrespectful. I never gave them permission to contact me. Shoot, back to what I was saying. Completely forget. Extroverted individual will feel for you being directly affected by the external stimuli. So if you say, I'm sad because my flower bed burned down and I can't take care of it anymore, the extroverted intuitive will feel for you, but not like an empathetic person. They'll feel as an empath, sad because you're feeling sad, and it may not occur to them exactly what's going on in that moment, but their goal will be to try to alleviate the discomfort that you are feeling. And please do pardon me for the distractions in this video. I would love to keep on talking, but unfortunately, whenever that happened, I lost my train of thought completely. I was on a roll and I lost it. And if you're wondering what type I am an introverted intuitive. INFJs, those that are empaths, are introverted intuitives. The interesting thing about us, though, is that we share some of the traits of an extroverted intuitive due to our nature of wanting to communicate with people in an extroverted way that makes them feel involved and included and accepted due to our extroverted feeling. So while we have introverted intuition as our main cognitive function, it is not to say that we do not express it as an extrovert sometimes because, or in an extroverted way, pardon me. Because, as I said earlier, no one person is 100% introverted or extroverted. However, there are definitely preferences on how you prefer to handle yourself in situations that come your way or that you are exposed to. And for the introverted intuitive, they much prefer not to expose themselves to large amounts of stimuli at once because for them, it becomes very overwhelming very fast. Where the extroverted introvert tends to be able to gather small amounts of information about everyone and everything around them, the introverted intuitive cannot handle the large amounts of stimuli around them at once because it's emotionally overwhelming for us. Anytime an introverted intuitive is exposed to a large group of people, such as group therapy where everyone is crying, the first thing that they will do is shut down. Or rather, the first thing they will want to do is shut down because they realize they cannot help everyone and simultaneously feel for everyone. But the unfortunate thing is, it is difficult not to feel for them because that is what an empath does. They feel. They are instruments of emotion. And when you play them the right way, they make a beautiful melody. However, when you pluck all the strings at once, you can't tell what tune is being played. And that is the problem with an introverted intuitive. The extroverted intuitive would also feel overwhelmed in the same way. However, due to the fact that they don't reflect inwardly before reflecting outwardly, it tends to not affect them as fast. This isn't to say that it doesn't weigh on them and have a impact before they realize that it was having an impact on them. However, it does mean that it would take a longer period of time for the emotional weight to hit them hard before they burn out and or need to retreat and spend time by themselves. This is also what separates an empathetic person, an empathetic introvert, or an empathetic extrovert from the empath, the introverted empath intuitive, and the extroverted empath intuitive. The thing that separates them most is the fact that sooner or later, the emotional weight will hit them, and there's nothing they can do about it. This is also to say that excess stimuli, such as loud music, yelling, and conflict, is something they tend to want to avoid. This isn't necessarily because they can't deal with conflict, but rather because they prefer to have peace and harmony so as to preserve the emotional well-being of everyone, not only themselves. And if anything, they would go through conflict if it means that they didn't have to go through conflict. But at the same time, they would much rather exude conflict from their life altogether. Exclude, not exude, pardon me. They would much rather exclude conflict from their life altogether than ever have to fight with anyone. The hardest part for the introverted intuitive is that they realize that these circumstances will come and will eventually hit them, and they will have to deal with it. This leaves an introverted intuitive to be rather secluded in public environments. And the reason for this is because they know that there is a chance that anyone could start an emotional tug of war with them. So to preserve themselves, I had to sneeze, I'm sorry. So to preserve themselves, they will seem more introverted or less emotional. This is because if anything does happen, they want to have the energy to give to somebody else. It is not because, oh, come on. This is not because they hate people or don't want to be around them. It is quite the opposite. It is because they know that they must be around people and therefore cannot afford to be expending their energy in idle talk or meaningless conversations. Though they realize it's not meaningless to somebody else, it does become meaningless to them because it bears no fruit for their labor. The extroverted intuitive, however, plays the reverse role, though much in the same way, still on the listening fence. The extroverted intuitive will also be rather charismatic in the way that they try to involve people for their emotional well-being. If they have enough life and enough charisma to them, then it will naturally rub off on other people, right? After all, bad apples rot good ones, but if you have enough good apples in a batch, then everyone's eyes are on the good apples, not the bad ones, because of how pleasing it is to the eye. So much in the same way, the extroverted empath tries to include everyone in their own positive feelings. This isn't to say that they don't pick up on toxic and negative vibes around them, but it is to say that they'd much rather focus on the good rather than the bad, still being realists, but yet being rather positive and trying to ignore the bad. One of the Achilles heel of an extroverted intuitive is that they can easily ignore bad warning signs around them for people who aren't healthy for them. This isn't because they see people around them as unhealthy or as healthy, but simply because an unhealthy person means somebody that you desperately want to see healthy. So it's better to not worry about it at all and just leave it to the positive atmosphere, right? Needless to say, I had to sneeze again. Needless to say, this isn't always possible. So, when conflict does arrive, the extroverted introvert can tend to become rather agitated, again, because they don't reflect inwardly before reflecting outwardly. And yet, they're still picking up on the vibes of what's happening around them. And this can cause quite a struggle on the emotional tug of war of an extroverted intuitive. Oftentimes, if this happens, you can find the extroverted intuitive becoming more like an extrovert and sometimes being passive aggressive, but not in speech, rather in action. They may decline to respond to your texts, or they may openly tell you that they don't want you in their life right now. And what they dread most is another conflict. What they'd much rather hear is, I'm sorry and okay. Though at this point, because they're starting to recognize the emotional weight of the gravity of conflict that has happened around them and the effect of the stimuli, they tend to not even want to hear a person's voice. Truth be told, though they wouldn't say this, they'd much rather just be left alone. Still being charismatic and rather outgoing individuals, the extroverted empath will try to hang out with people most of the time, especially people they can trust. And while this isn't a bad thing, it is very important that the toxicity that they carry around with them be diagnosed by someone who can monitor their well-being. Because an extroverted intuitive is so focused on their environment and not as focused on their emotional state, though they can be and oftentimes learn to be, it is to say that they don't always pick up on what's happening inside of them before it actually happens. And usually, this can mean a rather exhausted extrovert, one who desperately wants to spend time with other people and not be alone, but yet is required to do exactly what they don't want to do for their own mental health. It is also important to note that an extroverted intuitive is not necessarily balanced out by an introverted intuitive. While this definitely can be the case, such as in the perfect matches of the INFJ and the ENFP, it isn't to say that that's the case for every personality type and every introverted intuitive and extroverted intuitive. It is, however, to say that it isn't impossible for the two to balance themselves out. It requires a certain level of self-knowledge, though. And in addition to this, it requires being able to monitor your own self-health, as it is impossible for the two to constantly care for each other's emotional needs without needing cared for their own. It is important for an extroverted intuitive to have healthy people that they can spend time with, and that they can vibe with, and draw energy from. Likewise, it is important that the introverted intuitive have not many, but a few. Preferably only 2 or 3, though 1 would suffice, as any introverted intuitive would tell you. Even if they want more, 1 is plenty. The introverted intuitive, like the extroverted intuitive, needs to have somebody that they can recharge from. Preferably, though, this isn't another extrovert, but rather another introvert. The extroverted intuitive, however, can vibe from either an extroverted or introverted personality type, which is one of the things that make them unique, since they're constantly gathering information as an empath from the outside in. It means that an introvert may actually be the perfect and ideal match to help the extroverted intuitive recharge. This is important to note because an extroverted personality type normally pairs well with an introverted type, much as in the same way that an ENFJ can pair well with an introverted personality type that is also a feeler. Why am I saying this? It is simple. Because an extroverted intuitive picks up on the emotions of those around them. So if an ENFJ is a very charismatic person who tends to flourish in the company of other charismatic individuals, it is to say that the same thing is true with an extroverted intuitive, who doesn't need to say a thing and yet can gather information and recharge by being around an introverted individual who is also inwardly charismatic. What separates an extroverted intuitive from your normal extrovert is the fact that they are constantly gathering information and dissecting reality through their subconscious and experiences in an extroverted way. Their perception gives them this emotional response. The introverted intuitive, again, gathers the emotional response before responding, their experiences directly affecting their perception of the world around them. Between the two, which are you? Leave a comment in the description and let me know what you think. Make sure to drop a like if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And let me know what you'd like me to talk about next.